On August 29, 2005, New Orleans awoke to a deceptive stillness, the kind that settles over a city before something unimaginable unfolds. Meteorologists had spent days sounding alarms about Hurricane Katrina.
It's forecasted to be Category 4 at landfall. I looked at those. I said, this might be a little bit much, so I backed off to go to Category 4 impacts. When that product first came up, I did say, whoa, what is this?
But the calm that morning created an illusion of safety. Streetlights flickered softly, trees swayed gently. The air was thick, but not yet violent. People stepped outside to gauge the sky, unaware that the fate of their city had already been sealed hours earlier when the storm made its final turn toward the Gulf Coast. Katrina's origins were unremarkable. On August 23rd, the storm emerged as a weak tropical depression east of the Bahamas. It barely caught the attention of forecasters. Yet beneath it lay warm Atlantic waters capable of transforming mild disturbances into catastrophic events. As the system organized, meteorologists noticed its structure tightening, feeding on heat with alarming efficiency. Within a day, Katrina evolved into a Category 1 hurricane. It struck Florida quickly, producing rain, flooding, and wind, but nothing to suggest the monstrous transformation waiting on the other side of the peninsula. Once the storm entered the Gulf of Mexico, everything changed. The Gulf's surface temperatures were unusually warm that summer, creating ideal fuel for rapid intensification. Katrina strengthened so quickly that forecasters recalibrated their predictions hourly. Category 2 became Category 3, then Category 4. By the evening of August 27th, Katrina had grown into a Category 5 hurricane with sustained winds exceeding 170 miles per hour. Its massive spiral bands stretched more than 400 miles across, giving it the footprint of a small country. A meteorologist later described the satellite view as a perfect monster.
At daybreak, Katrina was roaring, and visibility was next to nothing. The 9 New Orleans firefighters riding her out inside the Lake Marina Tower couldn't see much, but heard plenty.
The wind coming through back here was, it was like a freight train coming through there, howling noise it was making.
New Orleans was vulnerable long before Katrina appeared. The city sits in a basin protected by an intricate levee system that had been built in segments over decades, never fully completed, and never tested against a storm of this magnitude. Engineers understood the risk. Residents feared it, but no one imagined the levees would fail, not in one place, but in more than 50. Mandatory evacuations began on August 28th, but tens of thousands were trapped. Some lacked transportation. Others had no money for gas or shelter. Many elderly residents lived alone and had no assistance. Families with young children weighed impossible choices. Some boarded buses to the Superdome, carrying blankets, snacks, and a fragile hope that the shelter would protect them. Others stayed home, convinced the city had survived hurricanes before and would survive this one. The storm made landfall early on August 29th near Buras, Louisiana. The Mississippi Gulf Coast took the first blow. In Biloxi and Gulfport, entire blocks collapsed under the force of a nearly 30-foot storm surge. Casinos floated away from their foundations. Roads disappeared. Homes shattered in seconds. Eyewitnesses described the wind as a roar so loud it drowned out their thoughts. New Orleans initially believed it had escaped the worst. The winds were strong but survivable. Rain battered streets, but not with the violence predicted. Some residents even stepped outside between bands of wind to assess fallen branches or check on neighbors. They did not realize that on the northern edge of the city, the 17th Street Canal was starting to buckle. The moment the levees failed did not announce itself with dramatic warning. It began with a trembling vibration as concrete shifted. Then came a deep cracking sound, followed by a sudden burst of water so forceful that it tore open the canal wall like paper. A resident later described hearing a noise like a freight train bursting through metal. The industrial canal failed next. A massive surge from the Gulf pushed against the aging levee system until it collapsed, unleashing a wall of water into the lower Ninth Ward. Houses moved like rafts, vehicles tumbled like toys. Entire families scrambled for higher ground as the water climbed with terrifying speed. Inside one home, a father lifted his daughter onto his shoulders as brown, debris-filled water surged through the living room. The mother pushed a dresser against the door, but the force of the water snapped it aside. They climbed into the attic just as the windows shattered. "Don't stop moving," the father said, hammering against the roof until sunlight broke through. The family crawled onto the shingles as their house groaned beneath them, slowly shifting off its foundation. On another street, an elderly man stood on his roof waving a white towel. "Please, I'm here," he shouted to every helicopter that passed. The water around him boiled with debris, refrigerators, fences, children's toys, overturned cars. Hours later, when a rescue swimmer finally reached him, he said, "I thought I had one more hour left in me." Hospitals faced their own nightmare. Charity Hospital lost power early, and backup generators failed as floodwater infiltrated the building. Nurses worked by flashlight, fanning patients whose ventilators no longer functioned. One nurse described using a hand-powered resuscitator for nearly 2 hours. She recalled, "We could hear people outside screaming for help. We couldn't open the windows. We couldn't go out. We were trapped with them." By midday, the truth was undeniable. New Orleans was drowning. 80% of the city lay underwater. Some streets disappeared beneath 10 feet of floodwater. The Superdome, meant to be a safe refuge, became a place of desperation. Toilets backed up. The heat grew unbearable. Supplies dwindled. Families waited for days, unsure if rescue was coming. Across the Mississippi Gulf Coast, the destruction was absolute. In some neighborhoods, nothing remained but the foundations of homes. Churches, schools, and businesses vanished. A local police chief described the scene as total erasure. When the storm finally moved inland, the silence left behind felt unbearable. The water remained for days, holding the city hostage. Boats drifted through streets where children once played. Photographs floated against fences. Doors hung open on houses where no one returned. Survivors walked through the sludge, searching for loved ones. Some found them. Many did not. In total, more than 1,800 people died across the Gulf Coast. Homes were destroyed, lives uprooted, a city reshaped forever. New Orleans eventually rebuilt, but the memory of those days sits beneath the surface of every street, every canal, and every storm warning. Because on that day, the water did not simply rise, it reclaimed everything it could reach.
On August 11, 1999, a storm struck Salt Lake City that meteorologists didn't even think was possible. A tornado tearing straight through downtown in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. In less than 10 minutes, it destroyed lives, leveled buildings, and proved that nature does not play by our rules. This wasn't Kansas. This wasn't Oklahoma. This was Utah, a place most believed was untouchable by such a storm. And yet, the impossible happened. This is the story of the most unexpected tornado in U.S. history. To understand why this storm shocked not only Utah but the entire country, you need to know one thing. Utah averages about 2 tornadoes a year, most of them weak, short-lived, and in open rural areas. And never, not once in modern history, had a powerful tornado struck the heart of Salt Lake City. It was considered nearly impossible. But all of that changed on one calm Wednesday afternoon in August. At first, the skies looked harmless, a little cloudy, a little humid, but nothing to worry about. People were on lunch breaks, shopping, heading to meetings, or strolling through the streets of downtown. But above the mountains, something far more dangerous was brewing. High above the city, the atmosphere was quietly boiling. A mass of cool, dry air had swept down from the northwest. At the same time, warm, moist air was trapped around the Great Salt Lake. These two air masses clashed, feeding instability into the sky. Thunderstorms began to grow, darkening the horizon. Most dismissed it as a typical summer storm. But meteorologists watching radar noticed something strange. The storm cells were rotating. By 12:40 p.m., the atmosphere aligned in exactly the wrong way. And then the unthinkable happened. It began as a thin funnel cloud descending from a thunderstorm just north of downtown. At first, people didn't understand what they were seeing. Some thought it was a trick of the clouds. Others pulled out cameras, snapping photos of the strange formation, unaware that within seconds it would turn deadly. The funnel stretched downward, snaking toward the ground, until it finally touched down near the Utah State Fairgrounds. And the moment it made contact, the atmosphere exploded into chaos. The tornado rapidly grew in size and strength. Within moments, it had transformed into a roaring F2 twister, with winds reaching up to 150 miles per hour. Dust, debris, and shattered pieces of buildings were pulled into its swirling core as it carved a path directly toward downtown. And this wasn't Tornado Alley, where sirens blare and families know to rush to basements. Salt Lake City had no widespread tornado siren system, no culture of tornado drills, and few homes built with storm shelters. People had no warning, no preparation, and most didn't even realize what was happening until the funnel was already on top of them. The tornado struck with brutal force. The Utah State Fair Park was its first victim, as barns, booths, and steel beams were ripped apart and twisted into piles of wreckage. Warehouses nearby were shredded as if by a giant's hand, their roofs peeled away, their walls collapsing like cardboard. Cars were tossed into the air, smashing down into streets and parking lots. And then, the twister set its sights on the Delta Center, the home of the Utah Jazz basketball team. Within seconds, the arena was under siege. Massive sheets of metal peeled away from the roof, curling into the sky. Windows shattered, raining glass onto the streets below where pedestrians were running for their lives. Concrete shook as pieces of debris slammed into walls and doors. The building barely held together, but the surrounding blocks weren't so lucky. Office buildings downtown had their windows sucked out and hurled like blades through the air, slicing into anything in their path. And then came the moment of tragedy that still haunts survivors. Near the massive LDS Conference Center, a construction site stood directly in the path of the storm. Workers had no time to escape. Scaffolding crumpled like paper as the tornado roared through. Heavy equipment was lifted, flipped, and thrown. One worker was killed instantly when a steel beam collapsed. Others were badly injured, some thrown across the site, others struck by wooden planks flying like missiles. For those on the ground, it felt like the world was ending. Chaos filled the streets. Alarms blared. Power lines snapped and sparked. People screamed and scattered, running blindly through clouds of dust and flying debris. Trees were ripped from their roots, their trunks hurled into cars and homes. In some places, the air was so thick with debris that survivors described it as breathing smoke made of wood, glass, and dirt. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. In less than 10 minutes, the tornado lifted back into the clouds. The winds calmed, the dust settled, and the city was left in stunned silence. What remained looked like the aftermath of a bombing. A path of destruction 4 miles long and 300 yards wide carved straight through the capital of Utah. Entire blocks looked shredded. Historic landmarks stood in ruins. Across Liberty Park, more than 1,000 trees were uprooted, some centuries old, now lying like broken matchsticks. What made this storm extraordinary wasn't just the destruction, but the rarity. Salt Lake City was never supposed to be vulnerable. This wasn't supposed to happen. Meteorologists around the country called it a once-in-a-thousand-years event. Even seasoned storm chasers, veterans who had chased tornadoes across Tornado Alley, could hardly believe what they were seeing when they arrived. A tornado in downtown Salt Lake City? They said. That's impossible. But it wasn't. The official toll was devastating. 1 dead, more than 80 injured, and an estimated $170 million in damages. But for Utah residents, the true cost wasn't measured in dollars. It was psychological. The belief that it can't happen here was shattered forever. People walked through the wreckage in shock. Some carried children, others dug through rubble, searching for belongings. Families returned to their homes only to find roofs torn off, walls collapsed, and years of memories scattered across muddy streets. Emergency services were overwhelmed. With no tornado sirens, many people said they didn't even realize it was a tornado until it was too late. Firefighters, police, and medical workers scrambled to respond, navigating blocked roads, downed power lines, and dangerous debris. Hospitals filled with the injured, cuts from flying glass, broken bones from collapsing walls, and shock from the sheer terror of what they had endured. The following days revealed the full extent of the destruction. Power was out for thousands. Roads were impassable. Entire neighborhoods looked as though a war had torn through them. And yet, even in the middle of devastation, something else emerged: resilience. Neighbors helped neighbors. Volunteers poured into the streets with chainsaws, food, and water. Church groups organized shelters. Communities rebuilt, even as they struggled to process what had happened. The 1999 Salt Lake City tornado is remembered as one of the most shocking and unexpected natural disasters in American history. It proved a chilling truth: nature does not follow our rules. Geography does not guarantee safety. And rarity does not mean impossible. Every city, no matter where it is, must be prepared for the unthinkable. Because if a tornado can strike Salt Lake City in the shadow of the Rockies, then it can strike anywhere. The Salt Lake City tornado lasted less than 10 minutes. But in that short span, it rewrote the rules of weather history. It left scars not just on the city's skyline, but on its people's hearts and minds. Survivors say they will never forget the sound, the roar of the wind, the scream of shattering glass, the thud of debris slamming into buildings. They will never forget the feeling of disbelief, looking up at a funnel cloud twisting through the city where no tornado was ever supposed to be. So now imagine yourself there, standing in downtown Salt Lake City, looking up as the sky darkens and a funnel cloud drops from the storm above. Would you have believed it? Would you have run? Or would you have stood frozen, watching the impossible unfold before your eyes? That day in 1999, thousands of Utah residents had to answer that question for themselves. And their city, and their understanding of nature, has never been the same since.